Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming this evening. It is such a pleasure to have you. I appreciate your willingness to learn something about a potentially new piece of technology that I hope can affect your life as positively as it has mine over the past few years. To start off with, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself in case you don't know about my technical background. I am a .NET developer that specializes in front-end development. That means that I'm focused primarily on JavaScript and CSS and how that interfaces with back-end programming. I have 24 years experience with some form of design or development and going on 14 years now of experience specifically with WordPress. Most recently, I built the club websites for Spirited Speech Masters here in Houston, as well as the guild website for Dungeons and Toast. I also recently took over as the web administrator for District 56 Toastmasters and will be performing that role for 2021-2022. But enough about me. Let's talk about WordPress. What is WordPress? WordPress is what is known as a content management system. That means that it is a piece of software that was originally designed specifically to deliver content to guests, to people who visit a website. Now that content can come in many different forms. That can be web pages, it can be blog posts, event details, images, video, all sorts of different kinds of content WordPress can deliver to visitors. It's also wildly popular, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is before we get started. First, I want to show you this chart. This is a chart of the relative market shares of all of the major content management systems out there on the market. You'll see that WordPress, by and large, blows everyone else out of the water at 59%. The next closest competitor is Joomla. And having used Joomla, I can say that 6% is high because I did not like it at all. WordPress powers 30% of the entire internet. That means that 30% of all of the websites that are built using WordPress because it's very, very easy and very powerful. Best of all, it's free. Can't beat that. WordPress is open source software, which means that there is a core of very generous developers who spend their time, effort, and probably in some cases money to build and update WordPress and make it the powerful tool that it is. One of the reasons, as I mentioned, that it's so popular is that it is free. And over the years, shared web hosting has become very inexpensive. With web hosting and a domain name, you are looking at probably $120 a year to be able to have a nice looking, professional seeming web presence. And if that sounds like a lot, I want to point out that shared web hosting means that you can actually host multiple websites. For example, I have 4 or 5 different websites hosted all on the same web space, which makes it very convenient. There's also a low barrier of entry to using WordPress. It's easy to install, so easy in fact that we're going to be able to do that in just a few minutes here together tonight. It's easy to learn. If you have any experience at all with a word processor, you can certainly learn WordPress. And last of all, it's easy to customize. The benefits of it being open source software means that if you can think of it and you need it, chances are someone has already built it, and you're more than likely going to have your selection of a number of different versions of that thing so that you can pick the one that fits your needs the best. Finally, as a professional developer, I can say that this is my very favorite part about WordPress. You do not have to re-engineer the wheel. Whenever I get the opportunity to start a brand new project at work, there is always a lot of lead up time, building things like authentication and security and roles management and potentially the ability to drag and drop additional material into that application. With WordPress, all that stuff is taken care of for you right out of the box. 15 minutes, you're up and running, ready to post. And finally, it's endlessly customizable. Not only is it easy to customize, but it's endlessly customizable. At last count, there are more than 55,000 free plugins to choose from on WordPress.org. On that note, I want to make a tiny point clear. When we talk about WordPress tonight, I am not talking about WordPress.com. I'm talking about WordPress.org. There is a difference. WordPress.com costs money. It's hosted by WordPress. You do have the option to have it hosted for free if you will permit ads to run on your site. You're also limited in the amount of customization you can do with a WordPress.com site. You can't install whatever plugins you want. You're limited to their much smaller library. And you have a limited number of themes from which you can choose. On the other hand, WordPress.org is free to download. It is self-hosted, which means that you do have to pay for some web hosting. You can customize it to your heart's content, and you can actually link it to a domain name very easily. The requirements for WordPress. This is for those of you who do not yet have web hosting, but are thinking about getting some. You do need to have web hosting that supports PHP. By and large, most web hosts are PHP based. That means that they're an Apache server. However, don't accidentally buy web hosting that is Microsoft based, because you cannot run WordPress on that. So you want PHP, which also tends to support MySQL databases by default. And they will either support automatic installation of WordPress, which is what I'm going to demo here tonight. Most of them will do this these days. Or if they allow you to transfer files, you can actually do a manual install, which is the way you used to have to do things. And finally, you're going to want to have a domain name. In many cases, if you purchase web hosting, they will actually throw in a year's registration of a domain name for you. Now, after that year, you'll be responsible for covering the cost of that domain, which is likely to run you between $16 and $22 per year. One thing to watch out for on web hosting if you go shopping around is that many web hosts will advertise a very low introductory rate. For example, I think Bluehost is right now advertising $2.95 a month, but only if you sign up for a 36-month contract. And at the cessation of that contract, it jumps right up to their ordinary $9 a month. So just something to be aware of. Plan for that. It is kind of a pain to move web hosts if you end up going that route and don't like the price jump. Next thing I want to talk about very briefly is domain names, because this is a common thing that trips people up. If you get your domain name through your web host, you're going to be set, because they're going to handle all of this for you. However, if you register your domain name or have already registered your domain name through a third-party service like GoDaddy or Google, you will have to set this up yourself. There is a handy little chart here on the right side of your screen that shows the interaction between a user, which is this user PC. The user PC sends a request for the URL, loni.com. And that request ends up gets sent to what's called a DNS server. DNS stands for domain name server. And that acts as kind of a phone book. So it does a little lookup. It says, okay, well, what's Lonnie's phone number? And it sends that IP address, that phone number, right back down to the user's browser. And then the browser knows, okay, that's the address of the server I need to talk to. So then it uses that phone number to look up the web server where Lonnie's files reside. And the web server sees that it's asking for that and responds with the documents. And why this is important is if you buy a domain name, you actually have to configure this DNS thing yourself. And it's not terribly complicated, but understanding how it works will save you a lot of headache potentially down the road. Okay, so that is all the introductory information that I wanted to provide you about WordPress. Now I'd like to go ahead and jump into a quick one-click install through my web host. Tonight, I'm going to be doing this demo using Bluehost, which is the web host that I currently use. I'm not specifically advocating for Bluehost, although they've been great for me. I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying that this is definitely who you should go with. It just happens to be who I use. So I went to their homepage and clicked login. I'm going to go ahead and enter my credentials. Oh, it remembered me from earlier. So it logged me in automatically. And what you're looking at right now is an intermediary screen that Bluehost has created to make things easy on users, people who are less technically savvy. This is not, however, the page that we need to look at. What we need to see is actually the nuts and bolts of the control panel. Control panel will be the first thing that comes up in a lot of different web hosts, but in this case, we have to click on advanced. And I want to point out, you can see up here that this address bar here says my.bluehost.com, but if I click on advanced, you're going to see that change to cPanel. So that right there tells you that now you're in the control panel, and that's what you should be looking for when you use your web host. So now I'm going to scroll down to the software section, and what I'm looking for is the WordPress Manager by Softaculous. This is a company that has created a number of software installers for many different PHP-based packages. I think they have them for Joomla and Drupal, but undoubtedly the most frequently used is that for WordPress. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to actually list all the different WordPress installs that I have on my shared hosting at the moment. As I mentioned, you can have multiple installs all in one web space, which is great. And I'm going to click install to install a new instance of WordPress. I've already associated another domain name with this web space, so it's going to show up here under this choose domain. It's my personal domain that only ever really gets used if I'm job hunting. Just a little heads up there for you, Doug, if you ever see anything important show up on there. So I'm going to go ahead and install something on lonihuff.com. I'm going to let it choose the latest version of WordPress. I'm going to leave that directory blank. You can actually choose to install it in a subdirectory, but that would only be useful if you wanted to have something outside of your blog that then pointed inward. So we're just going to install it at the root of my subdomain so that WordPress is the first thing that comes up. I'm going to change the name of this to Loni Huff and Loni's awesome blog. Now under the admin account, these are the default values. This password is randomly generated. It is a good idea to change the name of your admin account so that it cannot be guessed. I would guess that probably 90% of people out there have their admin account still set up with the word admin. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to Loni Two Shoes, and I have a password here that I want to use because and I don't have to worry about forgetting it. So copy that over. And that is not my email. I'm going to leave the rest of this stuff its default. When you do an install, your web host will often provide you a number of initial themes you can choose from. You're not obligated to use one of those though. And in fact, I'm just going to allow it to select the default, which is 2021, named for the year in which it was released. Okay, so you're going to see this little progress bar going. What it's doing right now is it is copying and extracting a zipped copy of the WordPress software to the web server, to the directory that belongs to me. It's going to copy and select the most recent WordPress theme, 2021. It's also building a database, a MySQL database where the data for this website will be stored, setting up an administrative user, and then it's taking those credentials, that database information, and using it to create a configuration file that WordPress will use in order to be able to talk to that database. And finally, it's going to create that admin account that we just talked about. So it should be all set up. I'm going to go ahead and open this in a new tab. And look at that. How fast and easy was that to get started? That is not
Loni, one question.
Yes.
Did you have to do the configuration of the MySQL database and such before you did this, or was it just magic?
It was all magic. One of the advanced options that I did not show was the ability to customize that database. You can actually create your user yourself, or you could just allow it to randomly generate your database name, database table prefixes. So not particularly aesthetically pleasing, but functional nonetheless. It also links me to the administrative piece of the website, which you'll see is my website address /wp-admin. All WordPress websites, unless they have done some significant customizations, WP admin works to get into the back end. Even if they create a second alias for it, WP admin still works, which in my opinion is a little bit of a security concern, but I guess it's been working for them for 20 years or so, so maybe it's fine. Go ahead and open that up. And I guess it remembered me from before. Okay, so this is what is called the dashboard. Before we go any further, I want to go over briefly a little bit of terminology that we're going to need to talk about the way WordPress operates. Dashboard, that's where we are right now. That is the administrative portion of the website. It requires a user to get into. Different users can have different levels of permissions based upon their role. So you can have an administrative user, and then you can have a series of people who are solely dedicated to creating content. So maybe you would give them the author role. The dashboard is what you're going to use to change the way your site functions, change the way it looks, change its content. And again, you access that by going to that admin side. The next thing I want to talk about is the difference between posts and pages. WordPress allows you to create both, and they are very similar, but they're used in different ways. Posts, when you create a post, you can think of it like you're creating a news post. For most WordPress themes, that data is immediately going to get dropped onto the front of your site, unless you have chosen a theme where that is not the case, or you've made a conscious decision to have maybe a static front page as a landing page instead. Posts are either built with blocks, and a block is this really cool thing that WordPress provides to make it super easy to create content quickly and cleanly without it just being one big wall of text. Posts are for what is known as timely content. So this could be something like breaking news or an upcoming event, something that you don't always want to necessarily have front and center for your viewers. This could be maybe a book review. And you're going to manage that through the dashboard post section, which I will flip over to now. So you'll see here, this post section is where you will go, and I'm going to walk you through that in just a little bit. Now let's contrast that with pages. Pages do not show up on your front page automatically. They are very different than posts. It's still built the same way using those blocks that I mentioned earlier or written in HTML, but you have to manually add a new page to your menu structure in order for people to be able to find them. Pages are for timeless content. So this is not something that you want to disappear when you add more content. This might be like your contact us page or your about me page, things that you want to always be available to visitors. And just like with posts, those are managed through the dashboard, the pages section. And when we look at those screens to manage those, you're going to see that they are very similar because the underlying data structure is quite similar. Next thing is the media library. Media files are any type of file that you might link to or share on your site. This includes pictures, can be Word documents, PDFs, music, video, etc., etc. By default, WordPress puts all of these files into a single bucket. There are plugins that you can get to help you organize your media library, which I highly recommend you consider, especially if you feel like your website is going to continue to grow and continue to grow. That organization becomes very, very helpful. The nice thing about the media library is once you put an image into your media library, you can easily reuse it in any time. So if you go ahead and you create a post and you remember that you had a picture of corn on the cob that would be just perfect for this post too, you can type into your media finder and click that as long as you've named it something with corn on the cob and embed it again, and it doesn't involve having to upload a new image. Just like with posts and pages, also managed through the dashboard. This is a top level menu item. Next are plugins. Plugins are my favorite because these are the little bits of programmatic information that create functionality that is different than what comes right out of the box. These are the things that allow you to build a more specialized web presence than just a blog. You might have a plugin, like I mentioned, that lets you organize your media library, or you might have a plugin that allows people to sign up for meeting roles, which is something we're going to talk about in our next session. We're going to actually go through the RSVP maker for Toastmasters suite of software. Generally speaking, the more mature a site is, the larger it is, the longer it's been around, the more plugins it's going to tend to have. This makes sense because over time, you're going to think of more and more things you'd like to provide your visitors. Unfortunately, the more plugins you have and the less well-developed or more complicated plugins you have, it's going to tend to slow down your site. Now, there are things that you can do to help with this, like caching, but I can tell you from experience that if you ever reach out to your web host and complain about slowness, the first thing they're going to tell you is, you have 65 plugins on your website and you're telling me about slowness? Nonetheless, without plugins, WordPress isn't particularly useful, so it is kind of a balancing act. Another thing to keep note of about plugins, especially if you're running a site that multiple people interact with, is that it's very easy to lose track of what they do. I recently discovered a plugin that allows me to add notes to plugins, which sounds kind of funny, but super useful. So now I can create a little note on every plugin I install that says, this plugin is for this. If you turn it off, this will stop working. You can also keep notes about this plugin costs this much money to renew every year. So all that information is all in one place. The documentation is much easier to maintain than, say, a separate spreadsheet. Plugins are managed through your dashboard, plugins, and we're going to look at how to install plugins, probably not tonight, but maybe in the next session. Now, when you install a plugin, you often have to do some configuration, and that is generally handled one of two ways. It can be either through dashboard plugin name. So in other words, if you installed Media Gallery, you might find a new option on your left sidebar called Media Gallery, or they might just create a small menu inside of the settings menu, which we will look at in a little bit. As I mentioned, there are more than 55,000 different plugins available at WordPress.org. All of those are free. And there are more plugins that you can download outside of WordPress.org that are also free. But there are some that will charge you a small upcharge for some additional features. And then there are some premium plugins which you have to purchase the entire thing in order to use it. Finally, themes. Themes are what make your site. Yes, Greg.
Question. Is there a security risk around WordPress plugins?
That is an excellent, excellent question. Yes, you generally want to look at, when you look at a plugin on WordPress.org, which is where I'd certainly prefer to install them from, because anything that had a problem would be likely to get pulled, just as with the Apple App Store. Every plugin on WordPress.org has a support forum that you can click into, and you can look at all the different support threads. If you see that there are 20 support threads that are open that the author hasn't responded to, you generally want to go looking elsewhere, because that's not a very well supported plugin. When you install a plugin, you are giving people access to not necessarily your database credentials, but you are giving them permission to make changes to your site. So you do have to be careful and only choose plugins that are well rated, that have been updated within the last 1 or 2 releases of WordPress. And if you ever run into a problem where you install a plugin and it just completely breaks your site, you can actually go into the file structure and delete that directory, and WordPress will know to just not load that plugin anymore so that you can recover. So themes. Themes are what your site looks like. This is going to include the HTML, the markup, as well as some additional PHP programming that can change the way WordPress functions out of the box. They're very easy to install. Just as with plugins, you can actually browse on WordPress.org and select a theme and one-click install it, then activate it. And most of them actually come with, the best ones come with customize menus that allow you to make changes to them without ever having to touch a line of cascading styles. So anybody can install a theme, make it look the way that they want within reason, and get up and running. One thing to note is that if you are at all a developer, you never want to modify your theme directly. So you don't want to go in and change any of the files that come with your theme, because if you do, and then your theme gets updated, all your changes will poof. Instead, what you would want to do is create a copy of that called a child theme. That is a little bit beyond the scope of what we're going to do here tonight, but it is something worth mentioning. Finally, permalinks are just URLs that are specific to WordPress. They are composed of several different parts, and they are important because search engines care about the way your URLs are structured. So you want to consider what you name your pages and what you name your posts to make them appealing to search engines so that they will index you well. Okay. Now I'm going to flip back over to my dashboard. This is what this site looks like out of the box. Just as with purchasing a Dell computer or a Hewlett-Packard computer, however, right out of the box, they installed some bloatware that I don't want, some extra plugins that are not useful to me that I'm going to quickly go ahead and eliminate just to make this a little simpler for us to look at. So I'm going to drop into this plugins section here, go to installed plugins. I'm going to close this. And other than Akismet, which I'm going to leave, I'm going to deactivate these. And then I'm going to delete them. The reason for that is because some of them are adding stuff to my sidebar that we don't need, and it's not going to help us learn anything. So we're just going to strip those out. And now we have what is the very basic WordPress install, which includes the posts, media, pages, comments, etc., etc. The first thing I want to look at is the posts, because you wouldn't be building WordPress if you didn't want to share content. So the natural place to start is posts. We're going to go to the all posts, which is just going to be a grid that lists all the posts. By default, WordPress creates a single post for you, hello world. It doesn't have any meaningful content. It's probably going to be the first thing you either delete or edit. I'm going to go ahead and delete it. So to do that, I can either hover over it and click this trash link, or I can select it here, click move to trash and apply. Okay, so now we have no posts in place, and we're going to go ahead and get started by adding new. And with this theme, it actually gives a fair representation of what it will look like once it's published. You see that it's taken on the colors of that front page. You'll also see here that this text is substantially larger because that's going to be my title text. So I'm going to make up a title, my fancy title. It's even using the fonts that it's going to use to render out to the front. This is a very WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get editor. Now, this is a really nice feature that's only come out in the last couple of years with WordPress. It's called blocks. If you click on this little plus, it's going to give you a whole bunch of different options. It starts off with 6, but if you click this browse all, it'll open this little slide out and you can see all the different kinds of blocks that you can use to build your post. Why this is nice is it allows you to easily and quickly create a post that it's just a wall of text. You can break up your post visually with images, tables, graphs, lists, headings, whatever is appropriate for the type of content. And you don't have to know any coding in order to do it, because this will render all of the markup for you. So I have something called a lorem ipsum generator, which just means it's going to generate me some boilerplate Latin. This type of thing is used by printers when they want to see how things are going to look. So I'm just going to quickly generate some fake text here. By default, it's going to create it as a paragraph. But if I hit enter, it's going to go to the next block and I can change that to a list. You'll see it's behaving just like a word processor would. In fact, if I hit enter twice, it's going to exit me from that list structure. It didn't create a blank list item. It's smart enough to know that I was trying to break out of that list structure. Let me go ahead and show you adding an image. I don't have any images on this site yet, so I'm going to have to upload one. But first, let me show you what the media library looks like. No items found. So I will upload a picture. We will put in a little dragon and give it just a second. I think it's trying to render a preview for me. There's my little dragon. By default, he's going to move to the left side of the screen. That's just the way images will appear in the natural flow of a document. But if I want him to appear on the right, I can click on this little bar right here, go to change alignment and align him to the right. Or I could choose to have him appear in the center. I can easily click to add a caption. And that will actually get saved with that image so that if I choose to use that image in another post, by default, it will load that caption for me again. But I can obviously choose to override that. It's just the latest bit of information that's been associated with that object. There is even an option to crop. So if you were to upload a very large image and you only wanted to show a portion of it, you could choose to crop it. And you can link that image to somewhere. So maybe if you used somebody's piece of art and you wanted to link to their portfolio, you could just click on that and click this little hyperlink and type in wherever you want it to go. Just like that, and that would create a link for you. Now I'm going to add, you could create a gallery if you have multiple images or a block quote. I particularly like the heading option when I'm writing a longer post because it helps the reader kind of keep track of where they are relative to the rest of the article. So headers are great to break up your content. By default, it will use H2, which is the second level header, because H1 should be the title. Trying to think if there are any other particular ones in here that are worth showing tonight. When you install plugins, they can actually add to this list. So you can install plugins that will give you additional blocks that you can use in your posts. I use a form plugin called Forminator that actually will let you drag and drop forms right onto your post. And those can be pre-configured with send this email to so-and-so with this data, for example. Okay, so let's assume that this is the content that I am dying to share with the world. Let's say I am done with this post and I'm ready to share it. I want to point out on the right side in this pane here, you have two different tabs, the Post tab and the Block tab. The Post tab are settings that apply to the entire post all at once. The Block tab are settings that apply to the currently selected block. So you'll see if I have this Block tab selected and I click into the paragraph and then I click into the list, that those options changed because they have different options associated with them. So that is more fine-tuned control over whatever content you have created. The one that I want to look at right now, though, is the Post tab. And it's important to know about both of those because otherwise you'll never figure out how to publish your post. So make sure you have the Post tab selected. You'll see that when I do publish, it will publish immediately. Now, one nice feature if you are getting into blogging is that you can target your content to appear at the most ideal time. So maybe you know that you have a large crop of readers that comes to your blog on Wednesday mornings. So you can actually post date a piece of content that you want to be very fresh for those users by changing this date. If you click this immediately, you'll be given a date and time picker so that you can specify when you want that post to go live. If you just hate that post, you can choose to move it to the trash. You don't really need to worry about post format. This is something that not all themes support. Just leave it at standard in most cases. And look at this permalink. We talked about this earlier and how permalinks can affect your search engine optimization and also help readers to know where they are on your site. By default, it's going to use this title, my fancy title, to create what's called a slug. Now, because I haven't published yet, it hasn't done that. So right now it's using a numerical identifier. Categories are just what they sound like. It's a group of posts on a similar topic. There are categories and tags. I think the tags have kind of gone passé. People don't use tags as often just because they're a little bit more cumbersome, but you definitely want to categorize your posts. So maybe I want to add a new category here called dragons. You can choose to nest your categories if you wanted to, but generally speaking, probably don't want to go more than a couple layers deep there. So when I added that new category, by default, it selected it. Obviously, when you're first starting, you're going to create a number of new categories, most likely. Featured image is interesting. Some themes use it, some themes don't. For example, the District 56 website uses the featured image at the top and the bottom of every post that's made. I'm not sure what 2021 will do with it, but I'm going to go ahead and select that dragon. I don't imagine that's going to look very good because usually featured images are going to tend to stretch. Often you're going to want to use a larger image for your featured image, but just for an example. Excerpt is interesting. You can choose to have your blog either show the entirety of the posts on the front page or to only show an excerpt. This is useful if you want to tease content. So maybe you only want to provide the first paragraph or two of your content and have them click read more to get the rest of your content. That's nice because then you can present more content up front, give the user more options, and reduce the amount of time and effort they have to spend scrolling past things they're not interested in reading. Allow comments, allow pingbacks and trackbacks. I'm sure we all know what comments are from the trollish sections of the interwebs. Pingbacks and trackbacks, what that is, would be if somebody were to link to your post, WordPress would see that they had done so the first time someone followed that link and read your post, and it would automatically create what's called a trackback to the originating point. So it would say, oh, Bob linked to this post over at Bob's great fishing site, for example. I generally don't mess with those, to be honest, so just leave those both on. And I'm going to go up here and look for the option to publish, which is right here. You could also choose to preview your post before you publish it, which is useful if you're not sure how that's going to look, or just save it as a draft so you can come back to it later. But for this case, I am going to publish. So you'll see that this permalink, as I mentioned, used that title, My Fancy Title, to generate the slug. If I don't like that title, if I don't want it to be called /My Fancy Title, I can go back in here to the permalink section. And now instead of showing me that identifier, that question mark ID = 6, it shows me that I can modify that slug. So I'm going to change it to Great Dragons. And so now you'll see that the new slug will be Great Dragons. And update. Let's go ahead and go back to the front page and see what that looks like. So it didn't stretch my dragon out. It looks like it just preserved it in its original dimensions. So that's good. And it's presenting an excerpt automatically. And the reason I can tell that it's presenting an excerpt automatically is that it's missing all of the HTML that I put in there. So the paragraph breaks and the list items, it didn't preserve any of that. So that's something that I'm going to want to change. That's probably something about this theme's configuration. So let's go ahead and we'll look at that section. Hopefully we'll stumble across that setting. So I went real quick. Let me show you that again, because that can be counterintuitive. I think that they did this for people with smaller screens. But basically what it does is it collapses the WordPress menu into this little box here so that you have a larger amount of room to preview. So I clicked on that and it took me right back out to the dashboard. If I go to this appearance menu, this is generally where you're going to go to customize your theme. This theme section, however, is where you go to choose a theme. We don't want to choose a theme. We have our theme that we're going to stick with for tonight. So instead, we're going to go to customize. All of these settings are defined by the person who created the theme. That means that they're going to be different depending on the theme you install. This is where you can change what you originally created for your blog's name or its tagline, which is that little byline of information. But I want to see, so homepage settings, I mentioned this earlier. Maybe you don't want to have a blog on your front page. Maybe you want to have a page of information that doesn't change. This could be useful for a company site. If you just wanted to have your about page be the first thing that comes up, you can change it from your latest posts to a static page. The reason I'm pointing this one out is that this is almost always included with a theme. You can almost always do this. I am not seeing, oh, right here, excerpt settings. So let's see what kind of options that gives us on the archive pages, post, show, summary, or full text. I don't know if this is going to fix it for us, but we're going to go ahead and click it. Looks like it probably will. Archive pages usually refers to something a little deeper in, but let's look to see if it does what we hoped. It did. So now it's going to show the full text. Now, if I were to go back into that post and use that box that said excerpt, manual excerpt, and type in something there, I believe that that would override this because I was choosing to create an excerpt that I wanted to show, which is always preferable to letting WordPress strip out your HTML tags and format it however it wants to. Okay, so that is what posting looks like. Looks like we have about 15 minutes, which should be enough time to look at pages, which are very similar, and then take some questions. So I'm going to close out the theme editor, and we're going to go over to the Pages tab. You notice it looks very similar to the Posts tab. Just as with the posts, it automatically creates a couple of pages that you might find useful, but are more than likely going to delete. This privacy policy page is a new thing that WordPress started automatically creating because of some changes that happened on the internet, and now privacy policies are useful. So you might not delete that one, but let's go ahead and modify our sample page. Actually, instead of doing that, because I want to show how to add one to a menu, I'm going to trash it and create a new page. I'm going to click Add New. All about me. I am short. That's all. Okay. So just as with the posts page, we have the same kind of setup with the two different tabs, only this time instead of post, it's page. That's going to be all of the settings that apply to the page as a whole, whereas block is going to apply to just the blocks. The same blocks that you had available to you on the posts are going to be available to you on the page. So once you've learned them for one, you've learned them for both. Same type of deal with the publishing. And the URL slug. So if I were to create this page now, and you go to lonihuff.com/all-about-me, it would take you to this page. You can have a featured image on a page. And generally speaking, pages do not allow comments, but you have the option to change that. The reason that they typically don't is, as I mentioned, pages are intended to be timeless content. So comments are generally less relevant to timeless comments, or to timeless content. Okay, and I'm going to publish that. And then I'm going to show you how to link to it. So you'll see that right now there is no link to that page that I created. What we need to do is add that to a menu and then add that menu to my site. That is done by going to Appearance, Menus, and I don't actually have a menu yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this menu. I'm going to name this menu something obvious like main menu. Now that I have a menu, I can add that page that I created. Click here, and it's going to drop it right into this little bucket. Now this can get really long depending on the size of your website. So right now it looks pretty empty because we just have the one page, but once you have 20 or 30 items in here, the ability to drag and drop things around is excellent. You're going to really appreciate that. If I expand that, you'll see that I can actually change the label. So maybe I don't want to have the label on the menu be that long. Maybe I just want it to say me. And then I save it. But watch, I don't think it's going to show up yet because I didn't say where that menu needs to appear. Now the theme has two locations that you can have this menu appear, and you can have it appear in both if you wanted, but I'm going to have this one go to wherever the primary menu is and click Save. Now if we go back, there it is. So if I added 8 more links to my menu, they would just start dogpiling across here. It is 8:51, which means at this time, I'm going to stop doing the demo and take questions. Please ask me questions or I don't get credit for question and answer.
Can you change the background color?
Yes, actually. Yes, watch how easy this is. If I go to Appearance and I go to Customize, pretty sure that this one has that feature built in. So let's go to Colors and Dark Mode. Background color. Now it's purple.
Okay.
Most themes are going to have a lot more settings than that. This is a very simple theme.
Okay.
You could even put an image in the background if you wanted, although don't do that unless you know what you're doing.
Hey, Lonnie, quick question for you. You know, on
Yes.
the District 56 website,
Mhm.
they have the title menu.
They have
And
the
there's
title menu.
menu, so the menu bar and whatnot on the
Yes.
main page. How can you do, not to say we want to do something like that, but let's say I wanted to make a template, you know, or a tab for each menu item. So like a
Let's see.
block at the top. You see how you have them at the top.
Oh,
So you
I see what you're
yeah,
saying.
you see the hamburger
yes,
screen.
yes.
But then let's say you see how you say home about us, and that's going vertical. Let's say you want
Yes.
to make it horizontal, and maybe
Okay.
that's for Thursday. But I'm just curious, how would we
So that can
set
be
up that?
accomplished. That's actually something that I want to look at. Is replacing this menu with something that's a little bit more usable. Spirited Speech Masters has its menu across the top
There
of the
you go.
page like that.
Exactly.
So that is going to be dependent upon the theme. And this is a good reason that you should develop a little bit of content before you choose your theme. Because once you start creating content, you'll have a better idea of the shape of your data, the shape of your information, and you'll have a better idea of what you're looking for out of a theme. If you choose a theme before you even generate a post, but then later on you decide you need a really image heavy theme that your theme doesn't support, then it's harder to make that shift later on. So you'd want to look for a theme right out of the box that included an area across the top for a menu. Now, ours doesn't do that for the District 56 website, but it can be made to do so. So that's what we're going to do.
Is that like serious coding to make that happen?
I am hoping that it will not be serious coding. However, District 56 does use a site software called Elementor, which is beyond the scope of this course. So it wouldn't do us a lot of good to spend time on that tonight. But yes, it is something that I want to do, and I will definitely reach out to you to get your thoughts on what should be front and center.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Just curious. Because I could see, you know, if we go back to our sample, me, since it just kind of sits out there.
Yes,
you know,
it looks kind of silly.
No. What's silly? I could look more. I could prompt people to say, okay, this is my menu.
Yes. Yeah, you could even make that menu. Most of them are going to tend to make it look like a bar, some sort of navigation. This default theme is very simple, but you could restyle it to make it look more like navigation. I'm using this one to show you because it's the universal theme that everybody starts with by default, but this is not likely to be the theme that you actually land upon for your web presence.
Okay, thanks, Loni.
Of course.
Hey, Loni. Sarah had a question in the chat. Could you just demonstrate for us how to install a plugin, something simple?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, let's close this. And I will show this tonight, and then I will show it again because we're going to be looking at some specific plugins. So I'm going to go to plugins. We looked at the installed plugins earlier, but instead of looking at that, I want to add a new plugin. The simplest way to do this is to go to add new and then search right up here at the top. So let's say I want to install
what about a calendar?
A calendar, sure. Let's look for a calendar. And there are 1,036 calendars from which you can choose. Real quick, let me show you the kinds of things that I'm going to look at when I'm deciding. For something like this, something that's really important, I'm probably going to evaluate 3 or 4 different options. But to choose those options, the things I'm going to look for are the number of active installations. Generally, the more people use it, the more popular it is, and the more popular it is, there's probably a reason. So I'm going to give preference to something that's installed a lot, that's highly rated, and that has been updated recently. You see this little check mark here that says it's compatible with your version of WordPress. That means it's been updated since the last major WordPress release. Now, just because you don't see that check mark does not mean that it's going to cause you a problem. but it's much less likely to cause you a problem if the author has taken the time to check it, make sure everything's running okay, and then put out a release so that there aren't any problems. Okay, so let's go ahead and install one. Different calendars for different purposes. I could totally see wanting to have a booking calendar, but that's maybe not what we're looking for today. Let's just install this all-in-one event calendar. That sounds nice and easy to use. Now, just because I installed it doesn't mean it's available to me yet. It's just gone to my list of available plugins. In order to get it working, I have to also click this activate button. But before I do that, let me show you this more details. This is something that I would look at before I installed it ordinarily. This is the page that the plugin has on WordPress.org. And the thing specifically that I would want to look at is the support forum. To get to that, you could click right here. And then scroll down to this view support forum. So you can see here that they have 7 out of 18 solved in the last, I think it was month. That's not what I want. I want something that's got a little bit better response rate from the author typically. But let's just assume that this one's perfect. Then let's go ahead and activate it. Oh, another thing to note is you can install 2 plugins that do the same thing. You can install 3 calendars if you wanted to. You wouldn't want to necessarily. And there is a risk that if two calendar plugins touched the same code, that they could conflict. So when you're evaluating software of one type, deactivate one before you activate the other so that you understand exactly what it's doing. Okay, so now all-in-one calendar is activated. That's why it's lit up blue here. And looks like it's by somebody called time.ly network inc, which is why it's showing up here in my bar as timely. I guess they make multiple pieces of software, and if you installed another piece of their software, it would show up in here. However, this one appears to require registration, which I don't want to do. So I would just delete that one right away and try a different one, to be honest with you. But we are at 9 o'clock right now, but that is how you install a plugin. We're going to do some more plugin installation and configuration next time around. Hopefully we'll look at RSVP Maker for Toastmasters. Looking forward to that. It's a really great piece of software. It helps people build awesome Toastmasters sites, which I know we all like. Thank you all very much for coming. I really appreciate it. Next session will be same time on Thursday, so 8 p.m. Central, that's 6 p.m. Pacific time. I hope you can make it, and tell anybody that didn't make it that they're certainly welcome to come to session 2 anyway.
Thanks a lot, Loni.
Sure, I will talk to you all soon.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Loni. Good night,
Good night.
everyone.